A frozen battlefield, a handful of young soldiers, and a camera that clicked at what seemed like the most mundane of times. But among them stood 19-year-old Francis Sherman Curry, a quiet, ordinary-looking kid, or so it appeared. 80 years later, historians zoomed in on that same photo, and a chilling silence fell over them. Something hidden in plain sight, something previously unnoticed, unsettled them deeply. It was a detail, a subtle nuance, that perhaps finally explained why hardened enemies once hesitated before him, why they seemed to sense something more than just another soldier. What could a single, seemingly unremarkable image reveal after so many decades? And why did it leave seasoned experts pale when they finally saw it? To understand the weight of that photograph, we need to set the stage. Imagine a December landscape in 1944. The Ardennes forest, usually a place of serene beauty, is now locked in the icy grip of winter. Snow blankets everything, muffling sounds and adding an ethereal, almost ghostly quality to the scene. The air is bitingly cold, a cold that seeps into your bones and never truly leaves. It's a cold that promises death. This is no picturesque winter wonderland. This is a war zone. The Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's desperate last gamble, is raging. The German army has launched a surprise offensive, smashing through the Allied lines with terrifying force. American troops, many of them young and inexperienced, are caught completely off guard. Chaos reigns. Amidst this frozen hellscape, pockets of resistance form. Small groups of soldiers, isolated and outnumbered, stand their ground against the relentless German onslaught. They are the thin line between survival and defeat, between freedom and tyranny. And it is into this desperate struggle that Francis Sherman Curry is thrust. He wasn't a general. He wasn't even a seasoned sergeant barking orders. He was just a private barely out of his teens. But fate, as it often does, had other plans for him. He was ordered to hold a crucial bridge, a seemingly insignificant crossing that would ultimately become a linchpin in the defense of Malmedy. To hold it against all odds. Now back to that photograph. It's a seemingly simple composition. A group of soldiers huddled together for warmth, trying to project an air of camaraderie amidst the carnage. But there's something about it, something deeply unsettling, that goes beyond the surface. It's not the snow, it's not the winter, it's not the cold. It's something in the eyes. The image shows Curry and his comrades, perhaps taken shortly after a particularly brutal engagement. They stand amidst the devastation, a landscape of shattered trees and frozen earth. Their faces are grimy, etched with fatigue and the haunting memories of combat. The snow clings to their uniforms, a constant reminder of the numbing cold that permeates everything. At first glance, it's a typical war photo, a glimpse into the lives of ordinary men caught in extraordinary circumstances. But look closer, really closer. Focus on Curry. Notice the way he stands, slightly apart from the others. He's not quite engaged in the camaraderie, not quite sharing in the fleeting moment of respite. He's present, but also detached, as if a part of him remains locked back on the battlefield. His eyes. That's where the true story lies. They are not the eyes of a carefree youth. They are the eyes of a soldier who has seen too much, who has stared death in the face and refused to blink. They are eyes that reflect a profound understanding of the brutal realities of war, a knowledge that no 19-year-old should ever possess. They are piercing, intense, and utterly unwavering. There's a stillness in his gaze, a quiet intensity that sets him apart from the other soldiers. While they appear weary and battle-worn, Curry exudes a different kind of energy. It's not excitement, it's not bravado, it's something far more profound. It's a sense of unwavering resolve, an almost preternatural calm that seems to emanate from within. It's as if he's still scanning the horizon, still assessing threats, still calculating his next move. Even in this seemingly relaxed moment, his mind is still racing, still strategizing, still preparing for the inevitable return to battle. He is a soldier on constant alert, a warrior who can never truly let his guard down. And it is this subtle, yet powerful, detail that sent chills down the spines of the experts who studied the photograph decades later. They recognized it for what it was, the unmistakable sign of a man who had shouldered an unimaginable burden, a soldier who had carried the weight of an entire army on his young shoulders. The photograph is a silent testament to the extraordinary courage and unwavering determination of Francis Sherman Curry. It captures a moment in time, a fleeting glimpse into the soul of a hero, but it also hints at something more, something deeper, something that transcends the limitations of the image itself. It hints at the psychological toll of war, the burden of responsibility, and the enduring power of the human spirit. It hints at a truth that would explain how one ordinary soldier could achieve the impossible. How one quiet kid from New York could hold back the tide of the German offensive. It is a truth that lies hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. And it's a truth that once revealed will leave you breathless. The truth that explains what made the experts turn pale. The truth that explains the legend of Francis Sherman Curry. By December 20th, 1944, the Ardennes was no longer the quiet, safe sector American commanders once believed it to be. The German counteroffensive had driven a wedge into Allied lines, creating panic and confusion. Towns fell in hours. Communications collapsed. For men on the ground, rumors traveled faster than orders. Whispers of massacres at Malmedy, stories of tanks pushing through roads that experts had insisted were impassable. Soldiers knew what it meant. Capture no longer guaranteed survival. The small Belgian town of Malmedy suddenly became vital ground. Road junctions converged there, channels through which reinforcements and supplies flowed. If German armor seized those crossings, the defense would unravel even faster. The 30th Infantry Division, already tested in Normandy and Holland, was ordered to hold the line. Among its positions, one stood out: a modest bridge on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a famous bridge, not one built of stone arches or ironwork. It was just a crossing in the snow, its frozen planks and steel supports leading into the heart of Malmedy. But in military terms, it was everything. A single armored column breaking across would open the way to deeper penetration, cutting off American units behind. To lose it would mean ceding the town, perhaps even the sector. Into this crucible stepped Private Francis Sherman Curry, 19 years old, carrying the rank of a replacement, not an officer or even a sergeant. Yet his orders were clear enough: hold the bridge. Behind him were other infantrymen, machine gun crews, and scattered anti-tank defenses. But the previous days had been brutal. Anti-tank guns were destroyed. Ammunition was dwindling. Men were exhausted. The line was fragile, and everyone knew it. By the dawn of December 21st, the Germans arrived. First with artillery, screaming shells tearing into the earth, exploding against frozen ground, then showering foxholes with ice and mud shards. Veterans could instantly read the meaning. Heavy shelling was no poker game. It was meant for bringing tanks that would ultimately roll forward once churned ground had pinned men down. He spotted them through the smoke and haze. First shadows and then unmistakable hulks of steel emerging from the fog. German tanks, not one or two, an entire spearhead, moving bumper to bumper across ground which textbooks had declared unsuitable for armor. The impossible was happening before his very eyes. Most men would have embraced the ground at that moment, prayed for reinforcements, or prepared to retreat. But Curry did something else. He didn't panic. He didn't wait. He took the initiative, spying the silhouette of a tank commander exposed in his turret, and raised his Browning automatic rifle. A burst of fire, deliberate and precise, and the commander slumped out of sight. It did not stop the tank, but it was a message to the Waffen-SS. The bridge would not be theirs without a fight. The Germans were still advancing anyhow. Machine guns swept the road. The infantry followed behind the tanks, sheltered by their armor. The defense, in Curry's opinion, couldn't delay. If those tanks crossed, Malmedy would fall. He ran over to a barn nearby where a bazooka was kept. With a little help from another soldier, loading the bazooka while under fire, he shouldered it and fired straight at the tank lumbering toward him. The rocket whooshed out and smashed into the tank. Smoke poured out of its hull. It groaned, shook, and started to withdraw. One tank stopped. Others kept moving forward. For most defenders, that moment would have marked a terrible disaster. But for Curry, that moment was only the beginning of what he would later on very simply call doing what needed to be done. The orders were simple. Hold this bridge. How he held it was going to be anything but simple. How he held it was going to be anything but simple. And as the next wave of German armor approached, Curry made a decision that would change not only the battle for Malmedy, but his place in history. The German push at the bridge should have been unstoppable. They had the numbers, the armor, the weight of artillery behind them. Francis Curry had only a handful of weapons at his disposal. But what set him apart wasn't what he carried. It was how he adapted. In a single morning, he shifted from role to role with a speed and precision that created the illusion of an entire unit. After knocking out the first tank with the bazooka, Curry didn't pause to celebrate. He moved immediately, scanning the battlefield like a chess player already preparing the next move. German infantry was pouring in behind their armor, rifles and machine guns firing in bursts meant to pin the Americans down. Holding one position for too long was a death sentence, so Curry ran. He crossed open ground under fire, diving for cover, hunting for anything he could turn into a weapon. That's when he found the abandoned anti-tank position. Scattered crates, wreckage, and, crucially, grenades. Crawling through mud and snow, he gathered them up. Most men would have clutched their rifle and prayed. Curry sprinted forward, closing the gap on the advancing tanks with grenades in hand. At point-blank range, he hurled the first one, striking close to a tank's tracks. The vehicle lurched to a halt. The second explosion rattled another crew so badly that they pulled back. A third crippled yet another tank, forcing its crew to bail out entirely. Each step was calculated chaos. One moment, he was a bazooka gunner. The next, he was an anti-tank grenadier, and then, seconds later, something else altogether, because while he was halting tanks, Curry also spotted movement. A handful of wounded Americans trapped near a wrecked half-track, pinned by machine gun fire. To reach them meant crossing a bullet-swept road. He didn't hesitate. He crawled, scrambled, and dragged each man one by one to safety, all while shells burst nearby. In that instant, he was not just a fighter. He was a medic, refusing to leave his fellow soldiers behind. Most men would retreat now that they were safe, but Curry was already thinking about the next role. Up went Curry onto the wrecked half-track, seizing the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the vehicle and laying down a tremendous fire into the German battalions. The heavy weapon boomed rounds into the German infantry, scurrying for cover behind their tanks. High-precision fire pinned them down, broke their cohesion, and bought precious time for the Americans. Curry was no longer merely defending, but was now commanding the battlefield. When the machine gun jammed after being preheated, he wasted no time. He picked up the Browning automatic rifle and continued to fire smooth, methodical bursts that kept his enemy guessing about just how many defenders they were really facing. For the Waffen-SS, it didn't look like the work of a private. It looked like a coordinated ambush, a full team working in concert. It was impossible to judge psychologically what Curry was doing. The soldiers expect certain attitudes from their opponents. The defenders are pinned, retreated, or awaiting backup. But Curry shattered those expectations. He moved aggressively and unpredictably, used different weapons and tactics so fluidly that the Germans were convinced they had stumbled into something much larger. In reality, it was one 19-year-old boy from New York, and even that wasn't all. He raided other weapons, collecting more Panzerfausts, the single-shot German anti-tank launchers left by retreating infantry. Now his quiet workmanship was being turned against the owner of that craft, the enemy. Stalking forward, he fired with unnerving accuracy, forcing tank crews to abandon their vehicles rather than risk destruction. Within minutes, one soldier raised the entire thrust of the SS. His comrades were now awestruck. What stared them in the eyes was not random behavior. It was steady ferocity, a young private taking on every character that a battlefield demanded. Rifleman, grenadier, medic, machine gunner, anti-tank hunter. And every time he made it through. For the Germans, the confusion spread. Who was this soldier? And how many more like him were hidden in the fog? On paper, the bridge at Malmedy should have been lost by mid-morning. The Germans had tanks, artillery, and seasoned Waffen-SS infantry pressing forward in coordinated waves. The Americans had a thin line of defenders, scattered weapons, and little chance of reinforcement. Yet hour after hour, the advance faltered, not because of a regiment or a squad, but because of one 19-year-old private who refused to act like a single soldier. Francis Curry wasn't just fighting, he was multiplying himself. Each time he shifted positions, swapped weapons, or launched an attack from an unexpected angle, he left the enemy guessing. From their perspective, the battlefield was alive with threats. Bazooka rounds from one side, grenades from another, a .50 caliber hammering from high ground, bursts of rifle fire from cover. In reality, every one of those attacks traced back to the same man. The effect was psychological. The Waffen-SS had built its reputation on intimidation. At Malmedy, just days earlier, they had slain surrendering Americans in a field, sending a chilling message: resistance was futile. But now, on this bridge, the roles were reversed. Instead of charging with confidence, German infantry began hesitating. Instead of pressing tanks forward, crews paused, unsure whether another hidden bazooka or scavenged Panzerfaust was waiting. The brutality that had cowed so many no longer mattered in the face of one private's relentless defiance. As if conjured from thin air, he was a morale boost to Curry's fellow soldiers. Men pinned behind broken walls could hear him firing, see tanks withdrawing, and suddenly believe that the line might hold. His moves didn't stall the enemy. They stiffened the backbone of everyone around him. Leadership didn't come from a rank that day. Instead, it came purely from example. Most astonishing of all to the Germans, though, was his calm. It was as fixed as a timetable. Whenever he sprayed fire to cover certain places, it was done precisely. He never spent an eternity at a point under cover. He moved, advanced, attacked, and on. Outside, it was a coordinated visual that made it look as if there were full squads leapfrogging positions with carefully rehearsed defense. That illusion sent the German commanders second-guessing their next moves. Is this a much smaller American detachment, really? Were they instead walking into an ambush? Time was the ally of doubt. Time for the injured to pull back. Time to regroup the defense. Time to ready the rest of the 30th Infantry Division for the next German attack. Minutes count more than men in war, and Francis Curry willed those minutes into being. The hardware, the bazookas, grenades, and the machine gun are what anyone might focus on decades after the fact. But these were just tools. What swung the scale at the bridge was his use of them to create the perception of strength when little existed. One soldier became many in the eyes of his enemy. One teenager caused an armored division to hesitate. Even the Germans admitted it later. Captured prisoners talked of heavy resistance at Malmedy. They described anti-tank teams in succession, overlapping fires and coordinated ambushes, never realizing that it was all smoke and mirrors. What they really faced was Francis Sherman Curry hustling through snow and smoke, turning every piece of wreckage into a weapon and every weapon into a reason for retreat. The bridge ought to have been theirs. Instead, it remained in American hands, not because of numbers, but because one man's making himself look like an army. And what came next would turn this impossible stand into a Medal of Honor legend. Why experts turned pale at first. The photograph of Francis Sherman Curry seemed ordinary. Another World War II snapshot of young men standing in the snow, rifles slung, faces marked by exhaustion. But when historians and analysts zoomed in, unease spread. This wasn't just a group of soldiers. It was a portrait of a 19-year-old who had fought like a phantom, and somehow the camera had captured it. The differences were subtle yet undeniable. The others slouched, their bodies sagging under days of cold and fatigue. Curry stood braced, almost as if the battle had not paused even for the shudder. Then his eyes, steady, alert, watchful. They carried the same unnerving calm that had once made German tank crews hesitate. One analyst whispered it looked as though Curry was still scanning for targets, even 80 years later. This detail aligned with a question that haunted after-action reports from the Battle of the Bulge. Why did hardened Waffen-SS troops, notorious for ruthlessness, pull back from a position guarded by a lone private? The photograph suggested the answer. Curry radiated inevitability. He didn't look like a frightened teenager. He looked like someone who would never yield. Military psychologists later described this as dominance presence, the intangible aura of a fighter who projects certainty, even under impossible odds. Most soldiers reveal relief or strain once the danger passes. Curry's expression was different. It wasn't bravado, it wasn't exhaustion. It was composure, the kind that makes opponents believe they're walking into a trap. As one historian put it, the Germans weren't staring at a boy with a bazooka. They were staring at inevitability, and inevitability makes you hesitate. That understanding explained the reaction in the archive room. The experts weren't arguing about a photographic image. They were dealing with the evidence that a man had bent reality on the battlefield, creating an illusion of a larger force that never existed. The illusion had remained. Curry still seemed decades later to have carried along with him the presence of an entire unit. The longer they studied it, the worse it got. The photo should not breathe, but this one felt very much alive. The same fear and doubt that had coursed through German soldiers in 1944 seemed to ripple across the ages. In those watchful eyes, the experts saw why that armored spearhead had stalled at a Belgian bridge. It wasn't medals, not speeches, not lesser honors that rendered the photograph chilling. Rather, it was a reminder that on this day, one little boy, barely 19, forced seasoned SS troops to retreat, not by numbers, but by will. The camera click was frozen in this very moment, and so was this force. That was when silence descended upon the room. The experts went pale. They were not merely staring in awe of a hero from the past. They were confronting the psychological impact of a one-man army. The German high command may have struggled to understand how this could happen. Curry didn't ask to be a symbol. Yet the record and the camera won't let him fade. The photograph stands as a testament to the burden he carried, the lives he saved, and the fear he inspired. His eyes told the unspoken story of a young man transformed into a force of nature, forever etched in the annals of history. If this deep dive gave you a new way to see a simple World War II photo, like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment on which detail hit you hardest. And when you're ready, watch the next video on your screen for another story that hides more than it shows.